If you had a bedroom in America in the 1970s, it was not just a room. It was a statement. A loud, colorful, slightly unhinged statement that said everything about who you were and nothing about good taste. The walls were covered in something. The floor was covered in something. The bed was covered in something. And none of it matched, but all of it belonged together in a way that only the 70s could make work. These are 20 things that were in every American bedroom in that decade. All of them are gone. And at least one of them is going to make you close your eyes and feel the carpet under your feet again. Number 20. The flip clock on the nightstand. Not a digital clock, not an alarm on your phone. A mechanical clock with plastic cards inside that flipped down one by one with a soft click every minute. The numbers were white on black, and each minute the card flipped and revealed the next number with a satisfying sound that was somehow both the quietest and the loudest thing in the room at 3 in the morning. The alarm was a buzzer that could wake the dead and sounded like a fire drill inside your skull. You slapped the top of it to make it stop, which became the first act of violence most Americans committed each day. The flip clock was replaced by digital clocks, then by phones, then by nothing at all because nobody wants to see the time when they are trying to sleep. But the flip clock made time visible. You could hear each minute pass. And there was something honest about that. Number 19. The black light poster. A poster printed in fluorescent colors that only came alive under a black light bulb. Peace signs, mushrooms, zodiac symbols, Jimi Hendrix, planets, wolves howling at the moon. The poster was barely visible during the day, just a dim, faded image on the wall. But when you turned on the black light, the whole thing erupted in neon green and purple and orange, and the room turned into something from another dimension. Every teenager in the 70s had at least one. Some had an entire wall. The black light itself was a purple bulb that made white clothes glow and made the room feel like a concert, even though you were sitting on your bed eating Fritos. Number 18. The Holly Hobby bedspread. For girls, this was the bedroom. Holly Hobby, a cartoon girl in a bonnet, printed on bedspreads, pillowcases, curtains, and sometimes the wallpaper. The entire room was Holly Hobby. From floor to ceiling, coordinated sets were sold at Sears and JCPenney, and mothers bought the complete package because matching was not optional in the 70s. It was law. Boys had their own version, race cars, spaceships, football teams. The point was the same. Your bedspread announced your identity to anyone who walked into your room. Today, bedding is white, or gray, or beige. Nobody's bedspread says anything about who they are. In the 70s, your bedspread was your autobiography. Number 17. The Cork bulletin board. A rectangle of cork mounted on the wall above the desk or the dresser, covered in a chaotic collage of photographs, ticket stubs, magazine clippings, handwritten notes, friendship bracelets, and report cards. It was the original social media profile. Everything that mattered to you was pinned to that board with colorful push pins. Your best friend's school photo, a picture of Farrah Fawcett torn from a magazine, the wrapper from the candy bar you ate at the movies on your first date. The cork board was a portrait of your life at that exact moment, and it changed every week as new things went up and old things came down. Nobody took a picture of it, nobody archived it. It existed only as long as you maintained it. And when you left for college, your mother took everything down, and the cork board sat empty on the wall for years, full of tiny holes that told a story only the pins remembered. Number 16. The chenille bedspread. Before comforters and duvets, there was the chenille bedspread, a heavy textured cotton spread with raised patterns, usually in white or pastel colors, that covered the bed from the pillows to the floor. It had tufted bumps that you could trace with your finger while lying in bed thinking about nothing. Chenille bedspreads were on every bed in America for decades. They were not warm, they were not soft, they were decorative. Your mother put it on the bed in the morning and you pulled it off at night, and nobody ever slept under it because that was not its job. Its job was to make the bed look made. That was the entire purpose of a chenille bedspread, appearance. And it did that job for 40 years until duvets arrived and people discovered that the thing on the bed could actually be the thing you slept under. Number 15. The telephone extension in the hallway. Some families had a second phone, and it was in the hallway outside the bedrooms. a small phone on a table or mounted on the wall, with a cord that reached just far enough into your bedroom that you could close the door on it and pretend you had privacy. You did not. Everyone in the house could pick up the other phone and listen, and they did. Your mother listened. Your brother listened. Privacy did not exist in a house with two phones on the same line, but the illusion of it, the act of stretching that cord into your room and closing the door, was enough to make a teenager feel like the conversation was theirs. That illusion was one of the most important things a 70s bedroom provided. Number 14, the dresser with the mirror. A large wooden dresser, usually dark walnut or oak, with a wide mirror attached to the back. It sat against the wall, and it was the largest piece of furniture in the room besides the bed. The top of the dresser was a museum. Perfume bottles, a jewelry box that played music when you opened it, loose change, a hairbrush with hair in it, school photos in small frames, and a tray of bobby pins and barrettes. Every woman in America had a dresser like this, and the mirror was where she became herself every morning. She sat in front of it and put on her face, which was the phrase used for applying makeup in the 70s, and the mirror saw every version of her from 16 to 60. The dresser is gone from most bedrooms now, replaced by closet organizers and wall-mounted mirrors and furniture that takes up less space. But no closet organizer has ever held a music box. Number 13, the hand-crocheted Afghan on the bed. A blanket made by hand from yarn, usually in a zigzag pattern of brown, orange gold, and avocado green, draped over the foot of the bed or the back of a chair. Your grandmother made it, or your mother made it, or your aunt made it at a church group while watching television. It took months. It was not bought, it was given. And it was on every bed in America because every family had a woman who knew how to crochet and believed that love could be expressed in rows of yarn pulled through loops with a hook. The Afghan kept you warm in a way that a store-bought blanket never did, because the warmth was not just physical. It was the knowledge that someone spent 200 hours making something specifically for you. That blanket is in a closet somewhere right now. Go find it. Number 12, the transistor radio on the nightstand. A small portable AM radio, about the size of a deck of cards, that ran on a single 9-volt battery and pulled in stations through a telescoping antenna. You listened to it in bed at night with the volume turned down low so your parents could not hear. Baseball games, late-night DJs, top 40 countdowns. The signal faded in and out, and the static was part of the experience. The transistor radio was the first private media device most children ever owned. It was yours. It went where you went, and what you listened to on it was between you and the dark. Number 11, the banana seat bicycle in the garage. Not technically in the bedroom, but every kid who had one treated it like an extension of their room. The banana seat was long, curved, and covered in sparkly vinyl. The handlebars were high. The front wheel was small. The back wheel had a coaster brake that locked up when you pedaled backwards, leaving a black rubber mark on the sidewalk that was your signature. This was not transportation. This was identity. The bike you rode said who you were the way a car says who you are as an adult. And the banana seat bicycle said, I am young and fast and free, and the whole neighborhood is mine. Now I want to say something about these bedrooms. Nobody designed them. Nobody hired a decorator. Nobody followed a trend they saw online because there was no online. The bedroom in the 70s assembled itself the same way the kitchen did, the same way the living room did, piece by piece, gift by gift, choice by choice. Your parents bought the dresser when they got married. Your grandmother crocheted the Afghan. You chose the bedspread. Your friend gave you the poster. The corkboard filled up over time with the evidence of your life. And when you stood in the doorway and looked at it all, it did not look like a magazine. It looked like you. That is what a bedroom is supposed to do. Not impress people. Reflect the person who sleeps there, and the 70s bedroom did that better than any bedroom since. Number 10. The jewelry box with the spinning ballerina. A small wooden or velvet-covered box that played music when you opened the lid. Inside, a tiny ballerina on a spring spun slowly in front of a mirror while a mechanism played a tinkling version of Swan Lake or Fur Elise. Every girl in America had one. It held earrings, necklaces, rings, and the first piece of real jewelry she ever owned, which was usually a thin gold chain from her grandmother that she was terrified of losing. The ballerina spun, and the music played, and the mirror inside the lid showed your face at an angle you never saw anywhere else. That box was the first private object most girls owned, the first thing that was entirely theirs. And they kept it for decades after the music stopped working because throwing it away felt like throwing away the girl who opened it every morning. Number 9. The tube socks with the stripes. A drawer full of white tube socks with colored stripes at the top. Red stripes, blue stripes, green stripes, rainbow stripes. They came in packs of 3 and every kid owned a dozen pairs. The stripes had to be visible above the sneaker, and they had to be straight, and if they were crooked, you pulled them up and adjusted them before you left the house, because crooked stripes were unacceptable. Tube socks were worn with everything: shorts, jeans, dress pants if you were a kid who did not care. They pulled up to just below the knee, and they stayed there because the elastic was industrial strength. Today, socks are ankle length and invisible. Nobody sees your socks. In the 70s, your socks were a statement, and the stripes were the punctuation. Number 8. The canopy bed. A bed with 4 tall posts and a frame on top from which fabric draped down around the sides like curtains. For a girl in the 70s, a canopy bed was the ultimate dream. It made you feel like a princess in a castle. The fabric was usually white or pink, and it matched the bedspread and the pillow shams and the curtains because everything in a 70s girl's room matched everything else. The canopy was impractical. It collected dust. The fabric sagged. The posts were in the way. And none of that mattered because lying inside a canopy bed with the fabric drawn closed made you feel like you were inside your own world, and nobody could reach you. Number 7. The incense burner. A small wooden box or a brass holder on the dresser that held a stick of incense. Patchouli, sandalwood, nag champa. The smoke curled up from the tip in a thin gray line that smelled like rebellion and calm at the same time. Teenagers burned incense in their rooms because it smelled like freedom. Parents tolerated it because it was better than the alternative smells a teenager's room could produce. The incense burner was the first decorative object most teenagers chose for themselves that had no function except to create an atmosphere. And creating an atmosphere in your own room was one of the first acts of independence. Number 6. The wall-to-wall carpet in a color that no longer exists. Not shag. Flat carpet, wall-to-wall, in a color that was somewhere between rust and burnt pumpkin, and had no name in any paint chart made after 1982. Or dark green, or a brownish gold that was called harvest but looked like mustard that had given up. The carpet ran from wall to wall and under the bed and into the closet and was installed over a pad that was slowly deteriorating underneath, producing a smell that was part rubber and part dust and part the entire decade. You lay on that carpet and did your homework. You sat on that carpet and played board games. You pressed your face into that carpet when you were sad, and it absorbed everything. The carpet knew you better than most people did. Number 5. The poster of Farrah Fawcett, or the poster of Bruce Lee, or the poster of Kiss, or the poster of the Fonz. Every teenager's wall had at least one poster of someone they wanted to be or someone they wanted to be near. The poster was bought at the mall, rolled into a tube, and mounted on the wall with thumbtacks that left holes your mother noticed and said nothing about. The poster was not decoration. It was aspiration. It was a window into a version of life that was bigger, louder, and more exciting than the one happening in that room. You looked at that poster every night before you fell asleep and every morning when you woke up. It was the first face you saw and the last. And it told you that somewhere out there, something incredible was happening. And someday, you would be part of it. Number 4. The nightlight in the outlet. A small plastic light plugged into the wall that glowed just enough to keep the room from being completely dark. It was shaped like a seashell, or a mushroom, or a bear, or nothing at all. It cost $1. It lasted for years, and it saved a child's life every single night, not from any real danger, but from the terror of total darkness, which at age 6 was the most real danger in the world. The nightlight did not illuminate the room. It proved the room still existed, and that was enough. Number 3. The pile of stuffed animals on the bed. Not one, not two, 15, 20. A mountain of stuffed animals arranged against the pillows every morning and dismantled every night. Each one had a name. Each one had a rank in the hierarchy. The favorite slept next to the pillow. The others were arranged in descending order of importance. And if one fell off the bed during the night, it was rescued immediately because leaving a stuffed animal on the floor was abandonment. This collection grew over years. Birthday gifts, carnival prizes, gifts from grandparents. Each one represented a moment, and the pile on the bed was not clutter. It was a timeline. Number 2. The diary with the tiny lock. A small book with a fake leather cover and a brass lock the size of a dime that could be opened with a bobby pin or a strong thumbnail. The lock was not security. The lock was a symbol. It said, "This is private." In a decade when privacy barely existed, when your brother read your notes and your mother searched your drawers and the phone had no secrets, the diary was the only place a child could say what they actually thought. You wrote in it at night, in bed, with the door closed, about the boy in math class and the fight with your best friend and the thing your mother said that hurt. Nobody was going to read it. Believe that. The lock told you so. The diary with the tiny lock was the first place most people in America learned to tell the truth. Not out loud, on paper, in secret, in a room that was entirely theirs for the first time in their lives. Now here is what ties all 20 of these things together. And this is the part I need you to hear. The bedroom was the only room in the house that belonged to you. The kitchen belonged to your mother. The living room belonged to the family. The garage belonged to your father. But the bedroom was yours. And the things you put in it, the posters you chose, the bedspread you picked, the music you played on the Transistor radio at midnight, the words you wrote in the diary with the tiny lock, those things were the first draft of who you were going to become. The 70s bedroom was not curated. It was accumulated. It was messy and personal and contradictory and honest. The black light poster next to the Holly Hobby bedspread. The incense burner on the dresser next to the jewelry box with the ballerina. None of it made sense together. All of it made sense because it was yours. Today, bedrooms are clean and coordinated and photographed for social media. They look like they belong to no one. The 70s bedroom looked like it belonged to someone very specific, and that someone was you. Number 1. The door you could close. That is it. A door with a handle that you could close. In a house where every other room was shared and every conversation was overheard, and every phone call was listened to, and every meal was eaten together, and every television show was watched as a family, the bedroom door was the only barrier that existed between you and the world. When you closed it, you were alone. And being alone, truly alone, in a house full of people, was the most important experience a child could have. It was where you cried without being seen, where you laughed at things nobody else thought were funny, where you practiced being a person before you were ready to be one in public. The bedroom door did not lock. It did not need to. Closing it was enough. It said, "I need a minute." And in the 70s, people respected that. The door is still there. But today, the phone follows you through it. The screen lights up in the dark. The notifications do not stop. The door closes, but the world does not stay on the other side anymore. In the 70s, when you closed that door, the world waited. 20 things, all of them personal, all of them gone. And every one of them made the bedroom feel like the only place in the world where you were allowed to be exactly who you were without explaining it to anyone. If you had a bedroom like this, drop one thing in the comments. Just one. The first thing you see when you close your eyes, and remember that room, because that room is still in you, and the things in it are the things that made you.